So welcome back. This is computer science, and the topic we're looking at today is operating systems. Now this is a big topic. There is a lot of content in here, so what I recommend is when Mr. Holton's telling us all about it, I recommend you take some notes. So over to Mr. Holton, grab a pen and paper, take some notes.
A computer needs an operating system, kind of like you need blood. They are very important and they can't really function without them. An operating system actually does a heck of a lot, and you probably won't notice a lot of what it's doing. That's the beauty of it. So let's explore a few examples of operating systems, but also really go under the hood and figure out what they do. So we're going to take this bit by bit and explore each function of an operating system. Well, some of them anyway. So let's do some examples. Okay. Windows, that is an example of an operating system, and if you're using a PC, chances are, not always, you could be using Linux, but chances are you are using Windows to drive that PC to make it do things. So that's an example. If you've got an Apple iPhone, then you will be using iOS. That's an operating system. If you've got a Samsung, then you'll be using Android. That is an operating system. And all these programs have got functions in common, it's like how they make your computer do things. So let's just examine a few of those functions. First off, user interfaces. Every operating system provides at least one type of user interfaces. And a user interface allows a user to interact with the computer and issue commands to it. And they come in a variety of different forms. So let's have a look at a few different ones. First one we're going to have a look at is a GUI, a GUI. Let's have a look on the right hand side now then. So that's an example of a GUI. It's from a phone. And if you wanted to, open up the notes program on this phone, you'd probably know how to do it without me having to teach you how to do it. There's a nice icon over there. It's called Notes. It's got notes underneath it. It looks a little bit like a notepad. Chances are to do that, you're just going to need to press that notes icon there. And that's that's the advantage of graphical user interfaces, is that they're intuitive. You don't need any sort of training or anything like that about how to use them. But they're not the only type of user interface. Let's have a look at this one here. So this is a command line interface for Linux actually. And I know commands for Linux to just do a few different things. So here I'm going to have a look at all the files that are in a directory. Here I know CD stands for change directory. So I'm going to go into that directory there, which is called code. I know it's a directory that's in a different color. Let's have a look in there. I've got the worst website. Let's make a file. Command lines are cool.yes. All right, I've just made a file there. Maybe let's get rid of that file now. I know the command for that. Done, so it's gone again. I've spent quite a lot of time with command line interfaces, so I'm quite comfortable moving around them. But you need to know the commands, so you need to have been taught the commands, so they are not intuitive. But the big advantage to them is that arguably I can do a lot more with a command line interface. Well, definitely a lot faster than I can with a GUI. If I know the right command, I can affect a lot of the computer, all the files in it very, very quickly. So that's an advantage of them. Okay, so that's a GUI, that's a command line, but what about this one? This has definitely become much more popular over the last 5 or 10 years. Hey Siri, what's the weather like today?
Today's high will be 23 degrees and the low will be 17.
So that's a voice activated interface, and that has definitely become much more popular, hasn't it, over the last 5 or 10 years or so. So you've got you've got Siri there, you've got Alexa, you've got Cortana, you've got all sorts of different things now. And again, it's very intuitive. I'm just speaking to my phone. It's a natural thing for me to do. I don't need any training to be able to ask what the weather's like. I can do that too when I speak to people normally. So that makes them really powerful as well. They're even more intuitive than a graphical user interface. All right, so there's user interfaces then. Let's move on to something else that an operating system does. So let's talk about memory management and multitasking. First off, what is multitasking? So it's the idea that you can run more than one program at a time on a computer. And can you believe that you didn't used to be able to do that? You could only run one program at a time. But nowadays we're used to having multiple things open. So for example, on a computer, you might have a web browser open, and then you might be listening to music as well. So you might have Spotify or something like that. And you might also be doing some work in the background whilst you're listening to music and browsing the internet for a search. So you have a word processor open. Those are 3 different programs, and the computer has to manage resources between these different programs. And one of those big things is memory. So let's have a think about that. So if we've got, say this is RAM, I'm going to draw a box now. This is RAM. I want my computer to section off the memory and make sure that my word processor doesn't use memory for Spotify. I don't want, for example, Word documents suddenly popping up in the middle of my music. It will cause that program to crash. But also, maybe I want to load another program as well. Maybe I've just decided I've got bored of all this work and I want to load up a computer game, but I'm going to keep everything else open, and it can't fit into this space. Well, it will manage the process of this thing called virtual memory, which we'll do another video for, which is all about swapping like data, which might be in RAM, to the hard disk drive to make space. So there you go. I'm going to move my word processor to the hard disk drive, and that means I've now got enough space for my computer game. So being able to run multiple programs, being able to keep resources separate, so like things like RAM, being able to share out processor time between the different programs, that is all part of what an operating system does. It allows multitasking to have multiple programs, but it also keeps all those resources like memory organized as well. And the next thing we're going to look at is file management. So a file operating system lets you muck about with the files on a computer. It lets you create files, it lets you organize them, and it does it in a particular way because it forces you into this folder sort of hierarchy. So we have an idea that we have a folder, and within a folder we can have another folder, or we can have a file. They're your two options, and the operating system forces that to be the case. It doesn't let you do anything different, but it lets you do things like create, move about, delete, and rename all these folders and files. And it might let you do that through GUI, so a graphical user interface, or a command line interface. Have a little look at the other operating system video for more information about user interfaces, but I'm going to show you how it works with a GUI. So let's have a look here. So this is Windows, and this is our typical interface to allow us to create and move about different sort of files and rename them. So here we go. I'm in a computer science directory in my C drive. I'm going to create a new file. So I'm going to go new. I'm just going to call this have a text document. I'm going to create a new file called computer science is fun. Okay, because it is. All right, so there is our file. Let's make that a little bit bigger so we can actually see it. And now I'm going to create a folder, and I'm going to call it I can put files or folders in this. That is a long name for a folder, but there you go. It is done, and look what I can do. I can go into this folder, and now this folder is empty, and I can create another folder if I want to, another folder, and I can move files from one folder to another just by dragging and dropping in a GUI, which is one of those things that makes it nice and easy to use. Okay, I can delete that file. I can right click on my computer science file there and go to delete. I can move about, delete, rename all these files and folders. Not to be underestimated, the power of file management, and that is an important thing that an operating system provides. Okay, our next one is peripheral management and drivers. So let's cover first off what a peripheral is. Well, let's see if we can spell peripheral. And peripheral is anything which is on the outside of the computer. So if you think of a computer that you've got in front of you, you will have, like, let's say it's got like a tower or something here with a CD drive. Let's examine all the peripherals that you can have. So first off, there's a keyboard. It's outside of the computer. That is a peripheral. Let's say we've got a mouse attached to it. That is also a peripheral because that's on the outside of the computer. This monitor is a peripheral as well, actually, because that's attached to a computer by a cable. So anything on the outside or around the edges of the computer, that's where it's periphery, where the word comes from, peripheral. That is something that the operating system has to manage. Because if you ever think about it, you are using probably a mouse if you're using a PC right now, and it is made by someone. So this might be made by Microsoft, for example. But then you might have another mouse when you go into school made by Logitech, and they will all communicate slightly differently. So they'll send slightly different signals to the computer when they're being moved up, down, left or right. Okay, that's just the nature of having different manufacturers for different pieces of hardware and technology. So can you imagine that if you were making a computer game, or if you're making any other piece of software, if you had to deal with all the different signals that every single mouse could possibly send to the computer, that would take a long time. You'll have hundreds of these to have to deal with, and that's just mice. So the operating system does that for you. It uses device drivers to communicate with different peripherals on the outside of the computer and provides like a common interface, a common platform for any other software to run on. So that means as a computer game developer, I know I'm just going to get a signal from the operating system that the mouse is being moved up rather than having to worry about individual manufacturers. The other thing that the operating system does is it manages the communication between the computer and the devices. So you might have, for example, a printer over here. And let's say you've sent several documents to that printer. Well, they'll be stored in something called a buffer, a printer buffer, and sent to the printer one by one as it gets through them. The management of that buffer, that temporary area where it's going to store that data, is all done by the operating system. Near there, we've got user management. Okay, so that is something that an operating system provides as well. Now, you may have logged into the computer you're using. If it's a phone or something like that, chances are no, but maybe if it's a computer, especially if it's at school, you will have logged into a user account. That account is controlled by the operating system, and it will tie a set of files and programs to your account. So when you log in with that account, you will see those files and folders. But perhaps if you were to log in with a different account or a different user, you would see a different set of files and potentially programs. And particularly when we talk about different files and programs, we talk about access levels as well. So as a user, you'll be able to access a particular set of files. Now, you might have different levels of access. So for example, if you're a teacher, you might have access to more programs than a student would do, something like the register system. If you're a manager, you might have access to other files and things which contain sensitive information which others cannot see. So managing who has access to what files is also done by the operating system. Lastly, the operating system needs to provide some level of security for those different accounts. So that's the idea that you'll need a password to be able to log into it, or maybe some sort of two-factor authentication. There's no point for an operating system to provide different levels of access and different accounts if it's going to let everybody use everybody else's accounts. So that idea of security as well. So user management then, peripheral management and drivers, and file management is also part of what an operating system does. If you've seen that and you've seen the other video, then you know everything that an OS does.
So I told you that was a big topic. Hopefully you've managed to get some notes from that you can use to help you fill in the blanks task. So if you want to open up the fill in the blanks task, as ever, we will review it afterwards, or Mr. Barnes will review it for you afterwards, and you've got 10 minutes starting now. So that's time up. Hopefully you managed to get some answers to those questions, and we're going to go over to Mr. Barnes to review it.
Okay, so hopefully you had a go at this activity about the main functions of the operating system. What we're going to do now is going to go through it and make sure you've got a full understanding. So we've got 5 main factors, or 5 main functions I should say, of an operating system, and each of these are listed here. So starting with memory management, we've got memory is allocated to an application, so more than one piece of software can be run at once. Data that is no longer needed is removed from the RAM. Where's removed? There it is. To free up memory for more data. So make sure it doesn't keep more programs in the RAM than it's actually using. So the next thing we've got is file management. So the OS, the operating system, organizes data into a hierarchical structure, and we use folders and subfolders for that, and controls the movement, editing and deletion of data. The hard disk is split up into storage sectors by the operating system, which decides which sectors to write the data to and keeps track of free space on the disk. Data is often placed in sectors that aren't next to each other, and this leads to defragmentation, which, if you've done the utilities lesson, you'll know all about. Okay, moving on then. So the third function of the operating system, just move it up, is user management. So usernames and passwords and access rights are ways which an operating system prevents certain files being modified or deleted. Okay, next one up is peripheral management. So remember, a peripheral is a device that connects to the computer, like a keyboard or a mouse. So we've got all hardware devices attached to a computer require a device driver, which acts as a translator for the signals between the operating system and the hardware. So when you install your device drivers, it gives you all the settings for that particular device. When a computer is booted up, the computer will select a device driver for the device it detects. And last but not least, we've got multitasking. So this allows more than one program to be run at the same time by sharing processor time, and allows a user to be more productive. So they're the 5 key features of an operating system, or functions I should say, and what they do.
So for the final part of this lesson, as ever, we've got some exam style questions for you. You're going to get 10 minutes to do these, then we will review them afterwards. So you've got 10 minutes starting now. And finally, we're just going to go over to Mr. Barnes, who will explain some of those answers. Make sure that you're making amendments to your answers if you need to.
Okay, so hopefully now you've had a little go at these exam questions as part of our deliberate practice on operating systems. So let's go through them and have a look at the mark scheme. So we've got here question 1. Xander's tablet computer comes with system software including an operating system. The operating system provides file management. Identify 3 ways that Xander can make use of the file management utility. Well, the first thing I'm going to say about how I manage my files is he could create folders and subfolders to organize his files. Okay, I'm going to say he could move his files between folders. And the final thing I'm going to say is he could delete them. Okay. So before we go on to the next question, let's have a quick review of this one then. So I'll just move this up very slightly so I can get the mark scheme on. So we've got here, there's a lot of different choices here. So I've got he could create folders and subfolders to organize his files. So down here we've got he could create files folders, so perfect, that's 1 mark. He could move his files folders, yeah, great. And he could delete his files folders, perfect. So you could also say he can place files into folders, he can rename files, he could copy them, he could change the permissions, he could search for them, he could view the different details, he could sort them, he could open them. But bear in mind, in the mark scheme here it says you can open it, so it needs to be very clear as to what. So if you just said, oh, you can open it, well, open what? A file, a folder? You need to be very, very specific. So any of those options are absolutely fine. Mine's perfect for 3 marks. Right then, moving on to the next question. So we've got one of the functions of an operating system is multitasking. Explain 1 reason why multitasking is needed in an operating system. Okay, so multitasking allows more than one program to run at any one time. I'm going to say it does this by deciding how each program, how much processing time each program will get. Okay, and while we're here, we'll answer the last question. So apart from file management and multitasking, what are 2 other functions? Well, I can remember memory management is 1, and peripheral management is another. Okay, so let's just have a look at these final answers. So we've got here allows more than one program to run apparently at the same time, because unless it's dual quad-core or whatever, it can't, so that's fine for 1 mark. And then I said it does this by deciding how much processing time each program will get by sharing the processing time. So you could have also said it allows the user to be more productive. You could have given an example that's appropriate as well, but mine gets 2 marks. And then finally, we've got, for the last one, we've got memory management, perfect. We've got peripheral management. Okay, you could have said it provides a user interface. You could have said not file or disk management, because that was in the answer. So any of them that are listed there for another 2 marks. Perfect.
And that is everything you need to know about operating systems. See you next time.